Hello viewers, you are welcome to my YouTube channel once again. I'm $1, your number one economics teacher. In this part, we want to look at utility part 5, that is consumer behavior. But before we look at that, I want us to look at a recap of what we did in the part 4 of the video. Now, we talk about how to calculate total utility, average utility, and marginal utility, and how we can use graph to plot these concepts. So we have the table here. This is the same table we use in the part 4, and so we have it here, and then we have the graph here, and we have plotted the total utility, the average utility, and the marginal utility, and then we have the marginal utility alone here, and we said that that is when you've been asked to to plot only the marginal utility. Is that clear? So you have the two graphs here, and this is what we did the other time. We also look at the relationship. Today our focus in part 5 will be on the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility. We're going to look at what the law says, and then we'll come back and use the table to explain the law. So stay back and enjoy this part. Okay, so we want to look at the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law states that as more and more of a commodity is consumed, all other things being equal, marginal utility decreases. As more and more or a successive unit of a commodity is consumed, all other things being equal, marginal utility decreases or diminishes. Now, so the marginal utility is written in red ink, which means that the focus is on the marginal utility. And so when you come to the table, we want to use the table to explain that. When you come to the table here, in the table, the marginal utility is in blue color. And what it means is that as quantity consumed increase from 1 to 7, marginal utility increases at 1 and decrease up to what? Up to -2. Now let me explain this. Now at quantity 1, marginal utility is what? Is 12, which is the highest or the greatest, which means that anytime you are consuming a commodity, the greatest satisfaction comes from the first unit that you consume. Anytime you are consuming an item, the greatest satisfaction you can ever get comes from the first unit that you consume. For instance, if you are riding a bicycle and you are going around a field, the greatest enjoyment or satisfaction from that riding comes from the first round that you go. But as you continue going for more rounds, the satisfaction level diminishes. So that is what we see or we are having on the table here, that the consumer keeps on increasing the quantity or the unit consumed. So the marginal utility or the additional satisfaction also decreases. It decreases up to 0, that is at quantity 6. And the 0 here means that the additional unit consumed yield nothing. I mean, the consumer is not deriving any more satisfaction from this unit. Now, then it moves to negative, which means that as the consumer forces himself or herself to consume additional units, the marginal utility decrease to what? Negative, which signifies dissatisfaction, or we call it disutility, which means instead of getting a satisfaction, the person is rather getting something that is causing him to feel uncomfortable. Is that okay? So that is what the law explains, and we can see this one when it comes to our practical lifestyle. It operates as we go out and come in. We see it in our life. Is that right? And we want to now move on and look at the origin, what the origin means. Is that clear? Okay. So the origin is a point where satisfaction is maximized. Satisfaction is maximized. At that point, the consumer cannot consume anything again. Is that so? You said at this point the consumer cannot consume more of the commodity. So when you come to the table, from the table, the origin occurs when marginal utility is what? 0. So and that is at what? Quantity 6. So in examination, the examiner can ask you at what point is satisfaction maximized. At what point is satisfaction maximized, or at what point is total utility maximized? And we are saying that that is when marginal utility is what? 0. So at the point of 0, total utility is what? Maximized. And that is at quantity what? 6. Now with the question, the examiner is looking for the quantity, not this. So at what point is satisfaction maximized? At what quantity is satisfaction maximized? The examiner is expecting you to mention the quantity here. So that is quantity what? 6. And so that is the origin. Then when it comes to the other state, disutility. Disutility occurs if consumption of additional unit causes marginal utility to attain negative. So from the table, this point occurs at quantity 7. Now, when it comes to the table, just after the 0, we have negative 2, which means that the consumer didn't end consumption at quantity 6. He or she tries to add additional unit, and that additional unit causes the marginal utility to go to what? Negative, which means that the consumer is no longer deriving any satisfaction. In other words, in my own words, I say that you are now vomiting what you have taken already, which is disutility. Is that okay? Dissatisfaction. Instead of enjoying the thing, you are no longer enjoying it. I don't know if you have come to a point where you have overeaten and now you can't sleep very well. You are tossing from one end to another. That is an example of what? Disutility. Is that okay? So that is about the origin and the disutility. And in examination work, the examiner can ask you to state the quantity at which there is what? Dissatisfaction. Is that okay? Or they can ask you what is the meaning of the negative marginal utility. It means that there is what? Disutility. The consumer is no longer deriving any satisfaction from the last unit what? Consumed. Is that okay? Okay. So we are going to look at consumer equilibrium, and we'll use that to derive the demand curve. Is that clear? So we want to look at consumer equilibrium, one commodity under one commodity approach. Now this one means that the consumer is consuming only one commodity. It is an assumption that you are spending your money on just a single commodity, and want to look at how the consumer equilibrium is established when the consumer spends his or her income on a single commodity. Is that clear? So let's look at the definition of consumer equilibrium. So consumer equilibrium occurs if the satisfaction derived from the last unit consumed is equal to the price of the commodity. Consumer equilibrium occurs if the satisfaction from the last unit consumed is equal to the price of the commodity. Or in simple terms, we can say consumer equilibrium occurs when the marginal utility is equal to the price of the commodity. That is, mu of x equals price of x. The x represents the commodity under consideration. Is that clear? And we are saying that this condition must prevail in the market for a consumer to be able to buy a commodity, which means that it will be difficult for every consumer to purchase any item if that consumer is not in this what? Condition or equilibrium. Is that clear? Now, some you can talk about bargaining and all those ones. Bargaining is an act of trying to restore what? Equilibrium in order to purchase the commodity. Is that clear? So we want to look at what happens if the consumer is not in equilibrium. But before we do that, in examination, they can test you that if the consumer is having a certain income and the price of the commodity is given, what quantity would the consumer be to be in equilibrium? Example, let's assume that they said price of X is equal to 2 cedis. How many units would the consumer buy to be in equilibrium? Now let's go to the table. The condition says that marginal utility of commodity X must be equal to the price of X. So it means we need to go through the marginal utility where we have what? 2. Remember, since the price is given, it means it's what? Fixed. So now we have our marginal utility here, 2. So if mu must be equal to p, then it means that my marginal utility, which is 2, is equal to what? The price, which is also 2. So it means this is what? The equilibrium. And what is the quantity there? So we trace to the quantity. The quantity is what? 5. So it means that the equilibrium quantity here is what? 5, or the consumer will buy 5 units in order to establish what? Equilibrium. We have so many values here. Now you can say 8, but if you say 8 over here, mu is not equal to the price, so that is disequilibrium. If you say 4, mu is not equal to price, so that is disequilibrium. So when it comes to the price is equal to the 2, or the mu is equal to the price, so therefore the equilibrium quantity is what? Is 5. Is that clear? So that is how we use this to answer that question. It's a potential question where I can ask. Okay, so now we are going to look at what happens if the consumer is not in equilibrium. What happens? What would the consumer do to be able to buy the item? Is that clear? So on the board we have the equilibrium condition here. So mu must be equal to what? Price. It must always be like that. Then we have another condition here, and that is what I want us to look at. What happens if the consumer is not in equilibrium? The consumer must be in this condition to buy a commodity. When you come here, the consumer is not in such a condition. Now look at it. Here, it means mu of x is less than p, price of x. So we said it's disequilibrium. In other words, p of x is greater than mu of what? Of x. So it means the consumer can't buy any commodity. And what this one implies is that the price is greater than the satisfaction. Is that clear? The price is greater than the satisfaction. Now, what must the consumer do to restore this equilibrium before buying the commodity? Now, let's look at something here quickly. Let's look at the relationship between price, quantity, and marginal utility. From the law of diminishing marginal utility, the higher the quantity consumed, the lower the marginal utility. And the lower the quantity consumed, the higher the marginal utility. That is why the law says that as more and more of a commodity is consumed, all other things being equal, marginal utility decreases. Now, if you come to the law of demand, between price and quantity, the higher the price, the lower the quantity. And the lower the price, the higher the quantity. Is that clear? So, now between this and this, when price is high, marginal utility is high. But quantity will be what? Low. And when price is low, marginal utility is low, but quantity will be what? High. Is that clear? So in order for the consumer to establish this equilibrium, it means that then the consumer must increase his or her marginal utility. How would he or she increase the marginal utility? That is by what? Consuming less of what? The commodity. So in order to increase marginal utility, we have to decrease what? The quantity consumed, so that the marginal utility will increase and be equated to what? To this higher price. And that is what explains the part of demand, the law of demand, that says that the higher the price, the lower the quantity. So you realize that because price is high, the consumer is decreasing quantity, so that his or her marginal utility can increase and be equated to what? The higher price, in order to what? Establish this equilibrium. Is that clear? So that is what we use to explain the law of demand, that the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. Is that clear? Now we want to look at the other way around. What if the marginal utility of x is greater than the price of x? So we want to look at that and see what happens. So this is the second case we are looking at. Now, whatever we are doing, we assume the price is fixed in the market. So consumers don't have power over the price. Is that clear? We only have power over the quantity. We can't decide price, we can decide quantity. So in this case too, there's another disequilibrium, because the marginal utility is greater than what? The price. In other words, your satisfaction is greater than the price that you are going to pay for the commodity. Now, consumers, because we always pay less for more, this is a good case for us. So now, since the consumer can't do anything about the price, I don't think anybody will go to the market expecting to pay higher for a commodity, and then when the price is given as low, the person will say that no, increase the price for me to buy. No. So there's something we must do to decrease our marginal utility so that it will be what? Equated to the price here. Exactly. Because marginal utility is what? Is greater than the P, it means that we need to what? Reduce it so that it will be equated to what? A lower price. Right? So what do we do now? Now we are saying that in order to reduce marginal utility, we have to increase the quantity consumed. That is what the law of diminishing marginal utility says, that as more and more, so as less and less of a commodity is consumed, marginal utility increases. That is the opposite. So if we increase the quantity consumed, the marginal utility will decrease and it will be equated to the lower price. And that explains the second part of the law of demand, which says that the lower the price, the higher the quantity consumed. And so this is used to explain the law of demand and also derive what? The law of what? The demand curve. Is that clear? Okay. So from this, we want to look at some the derivation of the demand curve. That is what we want to look at now from the principle that we have explained. Now this is the marginal utility. From the graph we draw, that's the marginal utility. So higher marginal utility, lower quantity. So if we want to decrease marginal utility, we increase the quantity. So we decrease and then we increase quantity to this level. Now all these points represent equilibrium or equilibria. So we have to use this point to trace or to derive the demand curve. So we trace from here, and then we draw, we trace from here, we draw, we trace from here, then we draw. So this is our utility, but this is our demand. We are using it to derive the demand. So we have our price here, then we have our quantity. So here let's put P3, and then we have P, because MU must be equal to P. So MU3 must go for P3. Then we have P2, we have P1 here. And so when we draw this, we are going to have this goes for quantity 1, this goes for quantity 2, and then this goes for quantity 3. So this is our demand curve, and that is why we say we use the utility to derive what? The demand curve. This is the horizontal derivation. We also have the vertical derivation of the demand curve from the utility. Is that clear? So this brings us to the end of this part, this section, and I want you to go to my YouTube channel, like, subscribe, and then share with your friends, and leave your comments for me. Is that clear? Contact me on 0245712230 if you have any problem. Is that clear? I wish you all the best. See you another time. Bye.